Before we begin, please be aware that this podcast contains discussion of sensitive topics, such as abuse of minors, of vulnerable adults, and safeguarding practices. Some content may be distressing or triggering for listeners. This program is intended for an adult audience. If you or someone you know is affected by these issues, we encourage you to seek support from a trusted professional or a local support service. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to this fifth episode of Inside Safeguarding, the official podcast of the Pontifical Commission for the Protection of Minors. From Rome, I'm William Roberts from the Commission's communications team. Each month, we bring you a reflective look at the Commission's work, conversations on safeguarding as they evolve, and a deeper insight into the wider challenges facing the Church today. This month will be a special episode dedicated entirely to the momentous occasion of the launch of the Commission's second annual report, which was presented on the 16th of October at the Holy See Press Office by a prestigious panel of four: Monsignor Thibault Verny, the Commission's new president, Monsignor Luis Manuel Ali Herrera, the Commission's secretary, Maud de Boer-Buquicchio, chair of the annual report team, and Professor Benyam Dawit Mesmour, a Commission member who also serves on the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child. This much-anticipated day showed more than anything how the Commission is turning its commitment into measurable, data-driven progress. Monsignor Verny opened the conference with a message that set the tone for the day. He thanked his predecessor, Cardinal Sean O'Malley, for the 10 years of tireless leadership and spoke with determination about the road ahead. Safeguarding, he said, isn't a project or a program, it's a conversion. A continuous process of walking alongside victims and survivors, not speaking for them, but with them. He reminded everyone that when the Church listens to those who've been wounded, when it learns from their experience and works to prevent future harm, it stands at the very heart of its mission. That idea of listening as conversion runs through the entire report. It's what gives this second edition its moral weight. Taking the floor next, Maud de Boer-Buquicchio, chair of the annual report, spoke with the authority of her extensive experience in child protection advocacy. She explained how this year's report builds on the pilot by focusing on one of the four pillars of what the Commission calls conversional justice, the principle of reparations. It's a theme that cuts to the core of what justice means in the Church. She said the time has come to move beyond narrow understandings that equate reputation only with financial compensation. Real reparation, she explained, is about relationship, acknowledging harm, listening, caring, apologizing, and helping survivors to heal. To guide that effort, the Commission has prepared a practical vademecum, an operational handbook that draws from the experiences of local churches around the world. It's built on lessons from victims and survivors themselves, whose voices are woven into the report more deeply than ever before. This year, the Commission expanded its victims and survivor focus group across all four of its regions: Africa, the Americas, Asia-Oceania, and Europe. About 40 participants took part in the one-to-one listening sessions supported by trained professionals. Their insights were gathered and distilled into themes that shaped the report's recommendations. One of the participants said something that stayed with many of us. They offered me $20,000, but all I wanted was an apology. It captures the truth that no financial payment can replace the human need to be believed, respected, and restored. Buquicchio also spoke about data, something she described as both a challenge and a moral obligation. Without reliable data, she said, accountability becomes guesswork. That's why the report introduces new ways of cross-checking information, drawing not only from church sources, but also from public, academic, and international ones. Taken together, these words framed the second annual report as both a mirror and a map, reflecting the current reality of safeguarding in the Church and pointing toward what still needs to change. The report itself is divided into four sections, as in last year's edition. The first looks at the local churches, their policies, their challenges, and the progress they're making. 18 Episcopal conferences around the world are covered this year. For each, the Commission works through a structured process, reviewing safeguarding guidelines, gathering responses to its questionnaires, and holding direct meetings during the bishop's ad limina visits to Rome. The second section moves from the local to the regional. It captures trends across continents, showing how safeguarding looks different depending on context. In some parts of the world, dioceses are developing strong survivor-centered practices. In others, resources are scarce and cultural barriers make reporting abuse painfully difficult. Yet, even in those places, small signs of change are visible. The report mentions, for example, the communal healing tradition of Huluifi in Tonga and the truth-telling process in the Italian dioceses of Bolzano-Bressanone, examples of how local cultures can inspire global learning. Section 3 focuses on the Roman Curia and its role in accompanying local churches. This year, attention turns to the Dicastery for Evangelization and its work with new and missionary dioceses, more than 1,000 of them around the world. The report finds a strong will to act, but also recognizes that safeguarding must be woven into every level of governance. Finally, the fourth section looks at the Church's outward-facing ministries. That is, those that consistently reach wider society, exploring how Catholic organizations live out safeguarding in their public witness. This year, it highlights the Focolare movement and the significant reforms it's introduced: independent commissions, clear communication policies, and structured support for victims. Throughout all four sections, one message stands out: safeguarding is above all about building trust. The Church can't heal if it hides, and it can't rebuild credibility without facing reality head-on. Alongside this analysis, the report also updates readers on the Commission's broader work, the continuing development of the Universal Guidelines Framework, and the expansion of the Memorare Initiative, which now supports local safeguarding capacity in 20 countries, with a dozen more agreements underway. These programs are practical expressions of accompaniment, turning policy into presence and offering real help where the need is greatest. The report ends with a reflection on future challenges. It warns that safeguarding must be sustained by more than goodwill. It needs trained people, adequate funding, and genuine solidarity between richer and poorer regions. Above all, it calls for safeguarding to be rooted in the gospel itself, as an expression of the Church's care for human dignity. As Maud de Boer-Bourguignon said in her closing words, "A child's sense of safety begins when we listen with our heart, not just our ears." That's the spirit that runs through this report, and it's what will define the Commission's work in the year ahead. You're listening to Inside Safeguarding. I'm William Roberts. Thank you for joining me. In this second part of the episode, we turn to someone who knows the second annual report from the inside out. Nathan Leopold serves as the Commission's Annual Report Associate, contributing to the research, organisation and analysis that form the backbone of the report itself. His work reflects the careful behind-the-scenes effort needed to transform data and testimonies into a document that can guide accountability and renewal across the Church. Today, we'll be speaking with Nathan about his journey into this work, the challenges and responsibilities of shaping the annual report, and what this second publication represents for the Church's ongoing commitment to safeguarding. Nathan, welcome, and thank you very much for joining us.
It's great to be with you.
So Nathan, could we start off with a brief introduction on your part, your background, and what it was that brought you to the Commission?
Yeah, certainly. So I'm Nathan Leopold. I'm the Annual Report Associate for the Pontifical Commission. I've been with the team now for just over 3 years. I actually began essentially my involvement in researching the abuse scandals in the case of a research project into one of the specific institutional mechanisms built into the Church's life that I found to be particularly interesting and actually hold a lot of promise in terms of promoting greater accountability and transparency in the governance of the Church. And then obviously that has a very specific application when it comes to the Church's safeguarding ministry. That mechanism is known as the ad limina visits. So it's the visit that every bishop in the world does to Rome on a rotating basis, approximately every 5 or so years. And it's sort of a key moment in the church's life of mutual responsibility, mutual accountability, where those bishops, generally grouped in their episcopal conferences, so with their fellow bishops from the same country, come to Rome and meet with the individual offices within the Vatican, known as dicasteries, of course. In this case, these meetings are a very unique moment for the bishops to essentially explain what their challenges might be. It's also an important moment for the officials of the Holy See to ask questions of those bishops with regards to the specific ministries. So this mechanism can be, I think, leveraged more and more effectively to promote greater accountability. So I found the commission, if you will. I found this team by way of that research. When I completed the research, I presented it to the commission secretary at the time, and ultimately was offered a role to try and implement some of that research in order to build out the commission's ad limina program. So again, how the commission leverages those visits for its own mission of promoting the safeguarding ministry in the local churches. Now, at this point, those ad limina visits also play a very key role in data collection for what ultimately finds its way into Section 1 of the annual report, which I imagine we'll also speak about a little bit today. And so I went from ad limina officer, if you will, of the commission to now annual report associate in order to help shape how the annual report's data collection can also use those ad limina visits to collect very grassroots data, truly from the diocesan level, to find out what each individual diocese around the world is or is not doing in safeguarding.
Now, regarding the annual report, the Commission has just launched its second annual report. From your perspective, what makes this edition different from the first, and how has it worked on improving the pilot?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I mean, ultimately, I should start with reiterating or mentioning the Commission's commitment from the beginning. From the moment we published our first report, we recognized its own weaknesses and the fact that the methodology was not fully matured. And we ultimately made a very strong commitment to a progressive implementation of what is, in the end, quite a rigorous methodology based in strong social science, strong political science, strong ecclesiology. And so what I think is most notable about this second report, different from the first, is indeed how it delivers, albeit still in a limited way, not in a fully matured way, but delivers on that commitment to where the second annual report indeed makes several specific methodological steps forward in terms of presenting increasingly credible, increasingly verified, and increasingly cross-referenced data. What I mean by that is those ad limina visits I was speaking about before is ultimately a series of reports where bishops are reporting on themselves or on their own challenges or on their own strengths when it comes to their safeguarding ministry. Well, what we realized we needed to do from the beginning and just didn't have the time yet to do so, or didn't have the full resources to do so, or the knowledge, frankly, was figure out ways of cross-referencing the data that the bishops submit to us with some sort of external source. And that external source, again, increases the credibility of the data. And so this report really makes strides forward in terms of including other data sources. So I'll highlight three if I can. The first one is an expansion of the annual report victim survivor focus group. So this is a focus group in this case that began even with the pilot annual report in only one of the Commission's 4 regions. With this second annual report, we've expanded that focus group to all 4 of the Commission's regions, so across all of the geographical territories that the Commission works across. We also, therefore, increased the number of participants, of victim survivor participants. And in this case, approximately 40 participants contributed to this focus group, whereby they were able to essentially provide their perspective on the safeguarding policies and procedures that are or are not in place in the local churches that we discuss, and in some cases, general trends in their regions that they experience through their painfully lived experiences as victims and survivors themselves. And so, of course, the Commission expresses its deep gratitude to those victims and survivors who participated in that focus group and were able to give this very unique and irreplaceable perspective. The second one that I would highlight is a new data verification methodology that we built out using the United Nations Committee on the Rights of the Child's online database. So as part of the committee's ongoing reporting mechanism of states parties on the Convention on the Rights of the Child, they evaluate or they collect reports from very grassroots sources, from local NGOs, from member states themselves, so from states parties themselves, from local or national human rights bodies. And what we did was, and all of this is published on their website, and what we did was we went through the findings from each of the individual countries that we cover, those countries that came on their ad limina visits. We went through the findings on the committee's website in order to code it and log any references in that reporting mechanism to the church, to cases of abuse in the church, to perhaps positive trends of the local church's work in safeguarding. In this sense, we found really relevant and I think valid findings that were able to be compared and contrasted again to the reports that the bishops submitted to us through their ad limina process. And we present those findings right alongside the bishops' reports. The third and final addition that I'd highlight today has to do with an addition to the methodology whereby we solicit contributions from the specific apostolic nunciatures in the countries that we cover. And so in this sense, the apostolic nuncios, the Vatican or the Holy See's ambassadors in those countries, are uniquely positioned to provide quite insightful contributions to our annual report and to the findings and the data in our annual report, because they're physically located in that local church. They're resident in that country. And so as part of their ministry accompanying the local churches, they're able to provide a unique perspective on what they think some of the local churches' strengths and weaknesses might be in their safeguarding ministry. So those are three of the sort of main additions I think that this year's report adds, that really builds on the rigor from the first report.
Well, you're obviously very closely involved in the compiling of this report. You've spoken extensively about it. But was there a particular part of this process that you found most illuminating? And what did you learn about the global safeguarding landscape through this work?
What I think is most illuminating and most inspiring when we're reviewing these reports coming from bishops, or when we're reviewing the findings from the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child, or the Apostolic Nuncios, or the focus groups, of course, themselves, are the series of really encouraging good practices that exist. I would even say very creative good practices that exist, including in parts of the world that you might not have expected to have particularly robust safeguarding infrastructure or robust safeguarding policies and procedures. And in that sense, it also highlights how the annual report is a platform to share good practices across Episcopal conferences, across the universal church, really tapping into the wisdom, in this case, the safeguarding wisdom and richness of the church. So those are that's what's most illuminating about this process, is to learn where certain good practices might actually emerge. Now, in terms of what it revealed as a mapping of the safeguarding landscape, I think it comes as no surprise that many of these local churches fall along are at different parts of the continuum in terms of their own safeguarding journey, right? Where they are in their the development of their safeguarding policies and procedures, and their ability to accompany victims and survivors. And so, in many ways, you can sort of think of it as three baskets. Each local church kind of finds itself in one of three baskets. The first basket being very far along in their safeguarding journey, right? Very rigorous policies and procedures, very robust victim accompaniment services, a strong commitment from the local bishops. That's the first basket, and it's often the basket where churches have had a long journey with addressing the abuse scandals themselves. The second basket is sort of this middle ground where there are certain dioceses or there are certain examples of strengths, but perhaps the full impulse or the full push and commitment to understand safeguarding as one of the church's central ministries is not fully manifest. And then the third basket is this category of churches that are really just in the first steps of their journey. In many cases, I should highlight, it's also because of a significant lack of resources. There are cultural reasons, there are resource reasons, a lack of resource reasons. And so we're very interested in how the annual report can accompany all three baskets of local churches, and that it's adaptable as a tool of dialogue and as a tool of conversion to accompany each local church wherever they might be in their safeguarding journey. But undoubtedly, the safeguarding landscape is diverse. And I think the annual report demonstrates that. Even each edition of the annual report will demonstrate those local approximately where each of those local churches, which basket they might fit in.
Yeah. Well, the annual report highlights both progress, but it also doesn't shy away from highlighting the ongoing challenges. Which developments stood out to you as a sign of real momentum in safeguarding, and which, on the other hand, presented themselves as obstacles?
So I'll take a moment to focus in on answer that question with regards to the topic of reparations, which, as you'll also see in the second annual report, is our conversional justice pillar in focus. So each year, the Commission studies a different one of the four pillars of conversional justice in dialogue with victims and survivors through the focus group, but also in dialogue with the local churches to find out specifically with a dedicated focus what policies and procedures relevant to that given pillar of conversional justice might be in place, and what are some sort of good practices. In this case, we found that the progress, the inspiring progress, and the challenges. I can speak to both of those through the lens of reparations. That is, there are some local churches that have made a very, very significant commitment to reparations, and even a very creative commitment to reparations. I think specifically of an indigenous practice in Tonga that's cited in section 2 of this second annual report. That's about repair and healing through traditional practices. And I think there are a lot of local churches that could learn from that practice in Tonga, for example. So that's an example of tremendous progress that should also be inspiring to help other local churches continue to progress in their own provision of reparations. Because ultimately, and this is where the challenge remains with regards to reparations, to answer your question, the challenge remains in the church's continued limited understanding of reparations. Too often, and this is what we heard with tremendous clarity from victims and survivors themselves through the focus group, is that the church regrettably continues to have a limited understanding of reparations as limited to financial compensation. And so the entire array of practices and provisions and services that the church could be providing to victims and survivors in order to help accompany their healing journey is left unaddressed. And so that challenge is one that we hope to address with this second annual report, whereby we're presenting a summary of the findings that we believe to be the sort of main components of a comprehensive and integral approach to reparations when it comes to the church's response to sexual abuse. And so what we end up presenting in the section that we call main findings and observations is an operational vademecum. So that's church language, if you will, for guidance to the local churches and to the universal church on the essential components that are necessary for an integral approach to reparations. And so our hope is we can address the challenge of a limited understanding of reparations across the church through a deep study and adherence or observance and integration of our operational vademecum in the case of the provision of reparations throughout the church.
Well, it may surprise some of our listeners after hearing such in-depth and erudite answers that you, Nathan, are in fact the youngest team member here with us at the Commission. So on a personal note, what does it mean to you personally to be contributing to such a significant project at, I think it's safe to say, a very early stage in your career?
Well, it's a profound question. I mean, I would start with saying I'm deeply honored to be a member of this team and to be surrounded by such inspiring colleagues on a day-to-day basis. Our members and my colleagues, fellow members of the personnel, are all safeguarding experts of the highest caliber, and truly, it's a pleasure to work with them each and every day. I mean, my journey to the Commission is one that it would be remiss of me to not mention that as an American, as somebody from the United States, I'm no stranger to the abuse scandals and how it impacts a local church with deep pain, and how it impacts victims and survivors on a personal level in ways that those of us who are not victims and survivors will never be able to fully understand. And so I express also my solidarity with them. My role, I'm trained as a political scientist. I'm trained in the social sciences, and with that original inspiration inspiration born out of pain, alongside victims and survivors and alongside the local church in the United States, I wanted to figure out a way to try and contribute to some sort of an institutional solution to what is undoubtedly a terrible tragedy and scandal that continues to persist today. This is not something that's relegated to the past. And so in that sense, that's why I began my research into these ad limina visits, and now am able to contribute, I hope, in a meaningful way to the Commission's theory of change model, right? How do we address this issue in a rigorous way, leveraging the institutional structures of the church, leveraging the unity within the church, because ultimately as well, the church does have a tremendous opportunity. This is where perhaps my youth might give me a sense of healthy, be it naivete or healthy optimism. Hope really is what it is. In that the church has the ability to become, I hope one day, a true protagonist for safeguarding around the world, beyond just internally, but in society as a whole. Again, leveraging its institutional reach in order to impact change at the service of children all around the world, be they Catholic or not. And it's through that conviction that I think I'm also encouraged to contribute. Ours is a faith in things unseen. And so although we might not see that vision of church, that vision of what the church can be, I think it's our job to try and push for it ceaselessly, tirelessly. And if I can be a small part of that, I am happy to be. And I feel, again, honored to be surrounded by people who I can join hands with and continue walking alongside as we ultimately try and usher in a brighter day for the church on behalf of victims and survivors.
Well, I think that's a wonderful answer, and one that indeed instills a tremendous sense of hope. Nathan, thank you so much for joining us, for taking the time, and for providing these insights into the momentous launch of the Commission's second annual report. Thank you.
It was a real pleasure.
And there you have it, a wonderfully comprehensive and exhaustive interview with our annual report associate, Nathan Leopold. And that brings us to the end of this 5th episode of Inside Safeguarding. The launch of the second annual report marks another chapter in the Church's journey towards accountability and renewal. It shows that safeguarding is not static. It grows through honest listening, verifiable data, and concrete accompaniment. The report's findings on reparations remind us that healing is a relationship, one that must be personal, practical, and sustained. As Archbishop Verny said during the launch, when the Church listens to victims and survivors, when it cares for the wounded and works for prevention, it stands at the heart of its mission. Over the course of each month, we'll continue to follow the Commission's work, speak to those engaged in safeguarding on the ground, and take time to reflect on the wider journey towards accountability and change. If you'd like to read more about the topics we discussed today or explore the second annual report in full, you can visit us at tutelaminorum.org. You can also subscribe to this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube, where future episodes will be published regularly. Thank you for listening and for taking the time to stay connected to these conversations. I'm William Roberts. Until next time.